It is so close to the 2020 election to see who will be running the country for the next few years. But I'm not talking about the election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I'm not even talking about America. I'm talking about the 2020 election in my home country of little old New Zealand, at the bottom of the map. We may be a small country of just 5 million people, but our politics are very exciting, and we're in the midst of an election season, election day being the 17th of October 2020. In New Zealand, we have a parliamentary system similar to the UK and Canada, but we use a unique voting system called MMP, or Mixed Member Proportional Government, to elect our 120 members of our parliament. This essentially creates two types of members of parliament, list MPs and electorate MPs. When you go in and vote, you have two votes. One is for your local representative, the member of parliament that will represent you and your area in parliament. This is how all MPs in Canada and the UK are elected, and is very similar to the process to elect a representative Congress in the United States. But the other vote a person gets is for their favorite party. This is to create a popular vote of what parties New Zealanders want to have in parliament. Seats are divvied up between parties in proportion to this party vote. The parliament will end up representing this number more or less, as there are calculations to even out the seats. Calculations that are far too complicated for this video. Just understand that this is a vote that people actually care about. To get a seat in parliament, a party must get one of two of these requirements. Have at least 5% of the party vote, 4.9% will not get you a single seat. Or you must have at least one electorate seat within your party. Without one of these requirements, your party votes will not be counted and will be proportionally split up between the other parties. This aspect of the process is a bit controversial, as in the 2017 election, David Seymour's ACT Party only got 0.5% of the party vote, and yet they got a seat in parliament, as David Seymour was the Epsom electorate representative. This is in contrast with the Opportunities Party getting 2.44% of the party vote and getting not a single seat. But let's leave the controversies of MMP for a future video. New Zealand has three branches of the government, like most countries: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. But our executive government is made up of members of the legislature. In an American context, it would be like the president being a member of Congress. The executive branch is made up of the party that has over 50% of the seats. If no party gains that amount, the parties must form a coalition, a group of parties promising to govern together. In 2017, an unholy alliance was formed between the Labour Party, the Green Party, and New Zealand First. New Zealand First is seen as a more centrist, nationalistic party, led by Winston Peters, a very controversial member of New Zealand politics. Peters used to be a member of the right-wing National Party, but formed his own party years back. This coalition was controversial at the time, as the National Party, who was the incumbent government since 2008, had the largest share of the vote, 44.5%, yet they didn't get to form the government. The current parliament is made up of 5 parties and 1 independent. National with 55 seats, Labour with 46, New Zealand First with 9, the Green Party with 8, and the ACT Party with just 1. Jamie Lee Ross is an independent MP who left the National Party during a scandal and disagreements with the main party. He held onto his seat as he was an electorate MP, and our laws dictate that he holds onto his seat for the term, regardless of party affiliation. Regardless, he said he's not going to contest a seat in the upcoming election, so we probably won't be seeing much of him in the future. So now you're all caught up with the state of New Zealand politics, more or less, let me discuss who is running in the 2020 election and discuss the likely outcomes. Labour is the largest left-wing party in New Zealand, comparable with Labour in the UK or the Democrats in the US. They are currently the largest party in the coalition government, led by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. You might have heard of her, she's kind of a big deal. Ardern has exploded into popularity around New Zealand and internationally, and she has done some very notable things. The third female Prime Minister of New Zealand, the first world leader to give birth in office. She governed New Zealand through the difficult March 15th mosque shooting terrorist attack, where 51 people lost their lives. She was seen as a unifying and empathetic leader during the aftermath of this traumatic experience for our country. And recently, she has led New Zealand through the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, locking New Zealand down, and most people believe the first lockdown was successful and well managed, even though it was actually ruled illegal by the court. Oops! She has high approval ratings, and most people seem to think that she will be able to get an easy win this election. Her party is polling very high, consistently over 50%. No one party in MMP history has ever ruled alone in New Zealand, making it kind of a big deal. Labour is not without its controversies. Labour policies just seem to lag and not get passed. They claim that it's due to negotiation issues with their coalition partners and the interruption of COVID-19 and the recession that has just begun. But before COVID even started, their Kiwibuild program, which aimed to solve the New Zealand housing shortage, was a complete failure. Recently, the light rail proposal was shot down, as well as an introduction of a capital gains tax. There has also been scandals with Labour ministers. The Health Minister, David Clark, broke lockdown rules multiple times during quarantine, eventually losing his position after lots of public scrutiny. Also, the Minister of Workplace Relations, Ian Lees-Galloway, got in some hot water after an extramarital marital affair that he had with a subordinate. Not a good look for the Minister of Workplace Relations. Galloway was also dismissed. There is a criticism that Jacinda Ardern doesn't seem to have many good people working around her, other than her deputy, Grant Robertson, former Leader and Justice Minister Andrew Little, and Chris Hopkins, who has taken over as Health Minister, but who is also the Education Minister. How many hats can this guy fit on his head? We might as well just give Hopkins every government profile and just call it a day. But it does look like, regardless of their shortfalls and controversies, Labour will probably be looking to get an easy re-election. National is the largest right-wing party in New Zealand, the equivalent of the Tories and the Republicans in America. Conservatism in New Zealand is a bit different from America though, as you could probably describe the average Kiwi as politically centre-left, so many conservative issues are not on the table. The biggest example is their support for socialised medicine in New Zealand. National was in power from 2008 to 2017, under the popular national leader, Sir John Key. Key stepped down as Prime Minister in 2016, handing the reins over to his deputy, Bill English. English was leader of the party for the election, and with their defeat to the Labour-led coalition, English resigned as the leader. And by resigned, I mean pushed out as leader by the ambitious political upcomer, Simon Bridges.
I'm the naughty boy in this parliament.
Bridges had a lot of controversies as leader, and was not overly loved by the public. During the pandemic, Bridges was overly critical of the government's lockdown precautions, seeming to flip-flop his positions on the lockdown, claiming National would have locked the country down sooner, and also that the country shouldn't be locked down at all. After he made a Facebook post criticising the government's 3-day extension of the COVID lockdowns, minutes after they announced it, he seemed to be pretty dead on the water. He was challenged as leader in May 2020, and Todd Muller became the leader. Muller took no time shuffling the party's seating around, seemingly paying other National MPs for supporting his leadership. Muller wasn't much liked either, also not polling very high. Labour just seemed too unstoppable, and National just couldn't seem to find a substitute for a John Key-shaped hole in the party. But suddenly, on the 14th of July, Muller resigned as leader, just months before the election. It is unclear whether he actually stood down or was pushed out like the previous leaders. Muller did take 4 weeks of sick leave from Parliament afterwards, claiming he was having panic attacks and anxiety issues. Regardless of if he left on his own volition or not, National elected Judith Collins to be their new leader of the party, nicknamed Crusher Collins, over her hard demeanour and her proposed policy to crush the cars of boy racers. Crusher Collins had been a big member of the party for years, and had this sort of inevitability to her, that she would eventually become the party's leader. And now she is, backed by her deputy leader, Kingpin. Jerry Brownlee. They seem to be ready to take on Jacinda Ardern. Collins even topped a New South poll as a preferred Prime Minister. The polls might be showing a strong Labour outcome, but it would be crazy to count Crusher Collins out of this one. Now, minor parties are very important in New Zealand politics. They currently make up 19 seats in Parliament, and are crucial to forming a coalition to form a government. Currently, there are 3 minor parties in Parliament: New Zealand First, the Greens, and ACT. First, let's look at the largest minor party, New Zealand First. New Zealand First currently holds 9 seats, and is part of the coalition government. Winston Peters is the leader of this party, and is currently the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. Peters is a sort of champion of the people, or political supervillain, depending on who you ask. He has even been compared to Donald Trump, due to being so polarizing.
I think of Peters basically as New Zealand's Trump.
New Zealand First voters have been traditionally more right-wing and older, and are from more regional parts of the country. These voters do not seem to be the type of people that would support a Labour-led coalition, in which New Zealand First joined. Many people see Peters having turned his back on his voters by forming this coalition, and that is evident by his poor showing in the polls. They are repeatedly polling below 5%, so without some turnaround, they may not get any seats at all. Peters has blocked many Labour initiatives, such as their proposed light rail and the capital gains tax. He also secured billions of dollars for a regional growth fund, basically a way to buy votes in regional areas. Yet it hasn't seemed to work. His bases seem to abandon him, and Peters may be out on his ass come election day. Notice that I've been saying him instead of the party? This is because Winston Peters is New Zealand First. He is an old guy, not expected to run in 2023. Shane Jones, a prominent member of the party, is not expected to win the Northland electorate that he is running in, which could have secured a seat for New Zealand First, so they wouldn't have to get over the 5% threshold. But they will probably not win that seat. Peters is adamant that the polls are wrong, and he'll be back for another election cycle, so I guess we'll just have to see, but the odds are not on his side. The Green Party is further to the left than Labour, similar to the NDP in Canada. They are led by co-leaders James Shaw and Marama Davidson. The Greens have always been this awkward party, being stuck between a far-left party and an environmentally centric party. The Greens have been an outspoken voice in the push for banning oil drilling, cutting emissions, and banning plastic bags. But they're also for things like increasing the minimum wage, stronger tenancy regulations, and a wealth tax. This could make them a hard choice for right-wing environmentalists to vote for. They have 8 seats in the moment, but are repeatedly polling below 5%. They're at risk of getting 0 seats this election, partially due to the popularity of Labour, pulling left-wing voters away from the Greens. This is a phenomenon that we've seen in New Zealand before, where the larger parties cannibalise the smaller parties. Then they're left with no smaller parties to form coalitions with. An argument could be made that National lost the 2017 election, as they didn't have a realistic coalition partner available, even though they were the largest party. Rising political star, Chloe Swarbrick, is running in the Auckland City electorate, and if she were to win it, she could help the Greens secure some seats. Swarbrick is becoming a political superstar in New Zealand, running for Mayor of Auckland in 2016, coming in 3rd place. She made international news when she called Tonmela a boomer on the floor of Parliament. She even ranked on a Fortune list of top 40 people in politics under 40 years old. Unfortunately, recent polls show that she's polling in 3rd place in Auckland City, making it unlikely that she'll win that electorate seat. This could be the end of the Greens for this cycle, but you never know. The Greens are usually chilling around 5%, only getting 6.27% in 2017. They may squeak through, similar to New Zealand First. ACT is a further right party than National. They tend to side on more libertarian views, being very pro-gun, pro-free speech, and recently making hints at pro-drug legalization policies. David Seymour has been the sole member of ACT in Parliament for the last 2 elections, and a previous member of ACT had held that seat the previous election. They used to be a larger party, getting up to 9 seats in 1999 and 2002, but recently all they've been able to do is hold the Epsom electorate seat. The reason they have held that seat is pretty shady, as the electorate is full of right-wing voters, and yet National doesn't campaign in that area. This is so that they can keep ACT afloat and have a coalition partner when required. This sort of deal is something that other parties are very jealous of.
You have the good grace of National rolling over and say, please vote and get this boy in.
Yeah,
I do believe
because
that
without ACT in the long term, they have no coalition partner and they're stuffed. So, we work together very well.
No
and it's called having a political strategy.
If Labour didn't run anyone in Auckland Central, the Greens could potentially win a seat there and stay afloat like ACT does. Prime Minister Ardern has ruled out doing a type of deal like this, claiming that it is dirty politics. But maybe she was worried that making a deal with the Greens like this would lead to expectations that she would have to do a similar deal with New Zealand First. Regardless, David Seymour has been the sole member of Parliament from ACT, and has kind of been a superstar since 2017. People seem to love his eccentric smile and his mannerisms, and he was a favourite when he started on Dancing with the Stars. He couldn't dance for shit, but people seemed to love him and kept voting for him to keep him on the show. In terms of policy, he's been pretty effective as a one-man army. He passed his signature euthanasia bill, as long as it passes a nationwide referendum that is. This was huge, and shows that he can deliver on his campaign promises. He was also the only member of Parliament opposed to the sweeping gun buyback scheme after the aftermath of the Christchurch shooting, getting a lot of love from gun enthusiasts. ACT is polling exceptionally well currently, possibly leading to their best showing ever this election. They seem to be benefiting from a fractured National Party, sort of the opposite of what's happening with Labour and the Greens. I do predict that after one election cycle, ACT might go back to their one-man army, as people seem to love David Seymour, but not necessarily his party. His list MPs may not be as palatable as him, and could harm the party in the future. Also, National could get their shit together and get back to the level of support they've had in the past, potentially leeching support from ACT. But that's all speculation. Anything could happen. The Maori Party is a party that stands for the interests of the indigenous people of New Zealand. And they're in an awkward position. They got no seats in the last election, previously having 2 seats. The party has been damaged by scandal in the past, and has slowly fallen into irrelevance. They were also members of the Jonki-era National Coalition in the past, possibly damaging their reputation with the Maori people, who tend to be more left-wing, similar to the situation that New Zealand First is in now. They are polling around 1% of the party vote. Most likely they're not going to reach the 5% threshold. Their only chance is to win one of the 7 Maori electorate seats. In New Zealand, there are 7 electorate seats that are open only for Maori people to vote for, meaning that technically they could win one of these seats. Polling is pretty lacking for these seats, so there could be a surprising outcome. Currently, Labour holds all 7 seats, but the Maori Party could surprise us and take one of these seats. They have held these seats in the past. The person I would expect to do this is John Tamaheri. Tamaheri was a former Labour MP and Auckland mayoral hopeful. They got a lot of traction in 2019, coming in 2nd place to the incumbent Phil Goff. He has the political experience and the name recognition to possibly winning a seat. Honestly, I'm not too versed in the Maori seats, but if I think there's going to be an upset by the Maori Party, Tamaheri will be the person to do it, but it's probably not that likely. There are a bunch of other minor parties that are running, but none that seem overly viable. There is little chance that any of these parties will get any seats, even less of a chance than the Maori Party. I'll quickly mention a few. The Opportunities Party is a centre-left party that was started in 2017 by famous Kiwi businessman and economist Gareth Morgan. Morgan was very polarising, famously calling Jacinda Ardern tagline, lipstick on a pig. Morgan is no longer the leader being economist Jeff Simmons. Top central policy is a universal basic income of $250 a week, similar to the US presidential hopeful Andrew Yang. Top is polling around 1% and is unlikely to get any seats. Simmons just doesn't seem to have the name recognition or even the charisma as Morgan, who got the party up to 2.5%. As a disclaimer, I'm actually a donor of this party, and could potentially vote for them. I'm a big supporter of UBI, and want it in the public eye, even though I doubt Top will be the party to get it passed. The New Conservatives are a far-right party, well in the context of New Zealand of course, that have never been in Parliament. They got close in 2014, getting 4% of the vote, but lately they've become more and more irrelevant. We probably won't be seeing them in Parliament anytime soon. The Vision Party is a new party run by Hannah Tamaki, the wife of Brian Tamaki. They are both evangelical Christians who run Destiny Church, a controversial New Zealand church, who oppose gay marriage and have been especially outspoken over COVID, saying they won't close down their church during lockdown. Destiny Church's members are predominantly Maori and Polynesian, most of their supporters coming from these ethnic groups. Both major parties have ruled out any future coalition with the Vision Party if they somehow made it into Parliament. They do not seem likely to get any seats, but they're running in a few Maori seats, so maybe, but probably not. The Advance Party is the only other party I think is even worth discussing, and that's a stretch. When Jamie Lee Ross left the National Party, he formed the Advance Party with conspiracy theorist Bill TK Jr. They are not likely to win any seats, especially since Ross has ended his campaign to hold on to his Botany electorate. He wasn't going to win that anyway, but still, this party is irrelevant and not even worth discussing. I'm only talking about them because the current member of Parliament is the leader of this party. Look at Jamie Lee Ross, he looks like he's about to do it to me. There are also 2 referendums this election as well, which is pretty exciting. I like to have a direct say on what will be the law of the country, better than trying to decode political promises when trying to decide who to vote for. The first one is to pass David Seymour's euthanasia bill. This will most likely pass and will legalize assisted dying for patients expected to die within 6 months. The other referendum would legalize marijuana for recreational use. This referendum is kinda up in the air. Public opinion seems split, with most polls being very 50-50. We will just have to wait and see how this ends up. Honestly, I thought public opinion would be a lot more pro-marijuana, but there have been some good documentaries by Patrick Gower.
Campaign between James and Phoebe really heating up now. Things. This is the fucking news.
Who's been doing some deep, fact-based reporting on it, making the conversation of legalization a bit of a hot topic. So to recap, the Parliament is very possibly going to be made up of 3 parties, Labour, National and ACT, with Labour being the majority and will form the government alone. But don't count New Zealand First and Greens out just yet, anything could happen with them, and I guess the Maori Party could surprise us and take a couple of seats. Any of these are possible. The one thing we can be sure won't happen is Jamie Lee Ross winning any seats. Oh wait.